You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
It's been 2 months since history repeated itself in Myanmar, where on 1st February, its de facto leader Dao Aung San Suu Kyi was detained along with other senior leaders of the government following a military coup in the country. At least 521 civilians have been killed in the past 2 months of protest against the military, and 141 of them took place on 27 March, which has been the bloodiest day of the unrest, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. The military seized power, saying that the November 2020 elections won by Dao Suu Kyi's party were fraudulent, an assertion which has been dismissed by the Election Commission. The National League of Democracy, or NLD, which Dao Aung San Suu Kyi leads, won in the November elections with a majority of 396 out of 498. It's important to note that Myanmar is not new to military takeovers. The country was immersed in a military dictatorship from 1962 to 2010, and the military had a tight grip over its citizens through hard tactics such as imprisonments, torture, and mass killings. An entire generation of Myanmar has suffered in silence at the hands of the country's military. And given that an entire new generation has now tasted democracy, the world is now watching on how the military is taking back control of a country and tossing aside a government that won a massive popular mandate only a few months ago. So, in this 2-part special episode, we are going to first hear from veteran diplomat and the former Indian ambassador to Myanmar, Mr. Vivek Karju, to understand the complexities of Myanmar, its history, and what led to the coup. In the second part, you will hear from voices in Myanmar about what the ground reality is, what measures have been taken so far by the military, and what do the people of Myanmar exactly want. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. For the first part of this 2-part series, here is Mr. Vivek Karju explaining the history of Myanmar and what led to the insertion of democracy with the election of Dao Aung San Suu Kyi in 2011.
I was India's ambassador in 2001 and 2 for a brief period. It is a very complex country, and to understand or appreciate its complexity, one has to go into the history of Myanmar. The Myanmarese people consist of a large number of ethnicities. The principal ethnic group are the Burmars. That is why the name Burma. But there are, as I said, a very large number of other ethnic groups.
Mm-hmm.
Now, generally speaking, the Burma people have traditionally inhabited the plains. Because if you look at the map of Myanmar, you find that on the edges of the country are mountains, and then there are plains. The mountainous areas are generally inhabited by the non-Burma.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a general proposition, but actually, if you go to the cities, there are the pockets of, or there are Burma people, there are other people, etc.
Mm.
The British had actually ousted in the 19th century the Burmars from power. They held power in Burma, in Myanmar, and they were ousted.
Mm.
And then Myanmar was attached to India, to the British administrative system in India, for purposes of administration.
Mm.
And this continued till 1937. And on this account, a large number of Indians and other nationalities also came into Myanmar. A feature of British colonial practice, which is important for us, was that the police and other forces of the British were generally recruited from the non-Burmars. They did not recruit them into the army. And it is only in 1945, when Myanmar was under Japanese occupation during the Second World War, that the Tamidor, or the Myanmar army, was created.
Mm-hmm.
And this was essentially an army with the Burma ethnic group. So you had a strange situation in Myanmar where the main ethnic group felt besieged, felt that it was discriminated against. It is also a fact which I should mention that there was a lot of evangelical activity among the non-Burma ethnic group, and hence a large number of them became Christian, whereas the Burma ethnic group is largely Buddhist. Now, I'm going into this detail because this is often missed when you try to look at the Myanmar situation or try to analyze. So, political power in Myanmar after the British left, the Burma ethnic group felt that they had the right. And the army was largely officered and staffed by the Burma community. Now, the army felt that it not only had to look after the interests of all Myanmar people, but it had in particular to look after the interests of the Burma. And I mean, this is what is the fact. All this was never said openly, but these are the undercurrents that the army gained power through coups in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And thereafter, it was only in 1988 that they decided to go in for elections. There were all kinds of other political experiments going on. There was a lot of xenophobia. I won't go into this. But in 1988, they went into elections. And in the elections, then there was hope that a democratic system will come about. But the moment they felt that things were going out of their hands, and things were going out of control, they clamped down and clamped down very brutally. And in this process, while the international community was quite outraged, the Chinese saw an opening and consolidated their position in Myanmar. There have been historical contradictions between China and Myanmar, but all that was overlooked because, as far as the army was concerned, the Chinese were supported. This is 1988. Thereafter, Myanmar was isolated. Initially, too, once the army had taken over, it was isolated, but after this, too, it was isolated. And the generals were under sanctions. And strangely, while the rest of Southeast Asia went through a rapid transformation, Myanmar, which in 1948 was perhaps amongst the best administered countries in Southeast Asia, what is ASEAN, and certainly one of the most progressive, because of its isolation, went very back. But the army was extremely xenophobic. It was very sensitive with outside contact. And they had a kind of attitude that there's enough water in the river and paddy and fish, and we can manage. The democratic forces in Myanmar waged a tremendous but careful struggle. They were very patient. And it is only comparatively recently that the army decided to loosen the strings it was holding in its hand and decided that there should be civilian participation and allowed election. But in the constitution that they framed, they were very careful to ensure that the army's participation in the political process would continue. It was not as if there was complete democracy that was put in and the army went back into the barracks. No, the army maintained a significant presence in the parliament. And under the constitution, army representatives or army officers themselves were in control of the security sectors. These included the ministries of defense and the Ministry of Interior. So when people say that democracy has been overturned, I feel that Myanmar was on the path of democracy, but no full democracy had been established, and this has been a reversal. Now the question is, why has this reversal taken?
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not justifying anything, I'm only trying to clarify things. I think this reversal has taken place because the army felt, following the last elections, which Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy or NLD, swept, The army felt threatened that its role in the political process will be weak. So it hit back, and it hit back very brutally.
Mm.
Now, one fact is important,
Mm.
and I don't know whether the army or many international observers factored it in their analysis. And that is that, like everywhere else, things have evolved. Social media has impacted. And the younger generation of Myanmar, perhaps, and I underline the word perhaps, including the younger generation of the Burma ethnic group, does not feel as besieged or as threatened as their forefathers had.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, in the last 2 months, the democratic forces of Myanmar have come out onto the streets and have made it clear that this coup which the army conducted is not acceptable. Now, is the army in a mood to go back? Quite clearly, it has shown no. So this is the background as I see it. I put it in very bold strokes, as simply as I could. We simply have to wait and watch. Because while these demonstrations are there, and these demonstrations are taking place in townships, etc., across the country, we do not still know, because of lack of information, about the depth of anger against the army. Obviously, there's substantial anger. If demonstrations are going on, certainly in the main cities, there is an enormous amount of courage being shown. But I haven't seen yet accounts of what the Burma villagers, or what the majority of Burma villagers are saying. Certainly among the other ethnic groups, there would be great anger. But this is a question mark in my mind, and I'm being candid with you, because on that I haven't seen enough evidence.
It also speaks to the fact that the younger generation, the Gen Z, has also tasted democracy, has recently tasted democracy for a long time now, for at least 5 to 6 years in Myanmar. And that is why also this democratic demonstrations are being taken place. So my next question is that the current situation in Myanmar is far more complex than what is being widely reported as well. And with the military coup, it puts the country's social and political realities in a very sharp focus now. So can you speak more on what this tussle between the NLD, the National League of Democracy, and the military has been since 2011? What has been the back and forth between these two sides since 2011?
I think to really put this in perspective, one has to see what Aung San Suu Kyi was trying to achieve, and her background and her role. That's very important. Aung San Suu Kyi is, as you know, Himmat, the daughter of General Aung San, who is the acknowledged father of the Takeover of the Myanmar army, who was assassinated soon after she.
And she was also put into house arrest as well after his assassination.
Yes, I'm coming to that. Now, there was some resentment against General Aung San, as I've read in my inquiry showed, among other senior officers of the Takeover, because he decided to marry a Karen lady who was a Christian, who was Aung San's mother. And after her assassination, and then Aung San's mother was revered there. At some stage, she went out on diplomatic assignment, and Aung San Suu Kyi herself, she was Aung San's mother, Aung San's widow, Aung San Suu Kyi's mother, was also the Myanmar envoy to India, and Aung San Suu Kyi studied in Delhi, and then she became well versed in the world. She married a British gentleman, and in 1988 she went back to Myanmar and then got caught up in this struggle for democracy when the generals decided to do away with the elections, etc. She was right in the middle. Now she took a principled position, etc. But there were deep suspicions which the generals harbored against, because, as I mentioned to you, they were very xenophobic, and she had married a British gentleman, etc. So they were, while at one level she was worthy of their respect because she was the daughter of General Aung San. At another level, they really didn't know how to deal with her. She was the daughter of the icon, and she was espousing liberal causes, etc. And soon enough, she was put into prison, and she became an international icon because the world and correctly admired her great strength, her fortitude, her vision. And from house arrest itself, she was a figure of great admiration in the world, and she became an icon for human rights, for democracy, etc. And her popularity among her own people and among all sections, Burma, non-Burma, grew. So finally, when it came time for the restoration of democracy, or beginning of the path towards restoring democracy, the generals, despite all their reservations about her, could not ignore her. And she also realized, and I think correctly, that she could not afford to overlook the sensitivities of the generals. This transformation in Myanmar could not be overnight. So a process of mutual accommodation took, where she accepted that the army would have a role, where she accepted that it would be in control of Myanmar's security sector. But they decided that yes, she should be given a chance, that she should lead the country. Now, it's tragic, to my mind, it's very tragic that the Western world did not appreciate the difficult situation that she was in. And it's ironic too that that they downgraded her iconic status because of the Rohingya issue. Now, I'm not going into the merits of the Rohingya issue. I think no people should be treated the way the Rohingya people have been treated. But Aung San Suu Kyi realized the situation, and she therefore treaded and navigated a very careful path. But she was under pressure from the West. And I suspect that the old suspicions about her resurfaced in the minds of the generals by early this year. This is especially after her success in the elections. And the old suspicions were that she might go back to full democracy, give up this accommodation, and try to put the army back, Tamidor back into the barracks, or put the Tamidor in the barracks. And hence, the relations broke down and the army did what it did. Now, I'm not, I don't think what the army did was correct. I'm only trying to understand why did the army act in this fashion.
Yes.
And there lies the reason, to my mind.
So, another point of contention in Myanmar is China's involvement and its relation with the military junta as well. There are obvious economic factors involved for China for keeping Myanmar's democracy stable, and also in their favor as well, because they have been in favor of the military so far. So, in your opinion, how does China see Aung San Suu Kyi as a leader, and what makes her a quote-unquote unreliable partner for China?
I think China understands the complexities of Myanmar. The relationship between China and Myanmar historically has been generally one of tension and suspicions. Now, after 1988, the Myanmar army and the Chinese established a very close relationship, partly because the Myanmar army needed the Chinese, and China saw strategic opportunities in Myanmar. But to further its objectives in Myanmar, China needed above all a stable, it didn't want turbulence. That would damage it. And therefore, I do feel that it was going along with the accommodative processes that were set in and which were represented in the Myanmar Constitution. The breakdown of this accommodative process and the coup could not have been to China's liking. But the Chinese required to follow a supple diplomatic process. And therefore, I think they are unwilling to put any pressure on the Myanmar army. And in a sense, they're acting as its shield. So, in one sense, they are going back to the old policies which were witnessed in full measure after 1988. But I thought that the Chinese would have cautioned the Myanmar army that there should be no great violence. There shouldn't be blood on the streets.
Yeah.
Now, Clearly, the number of deaths that have taken place, here of a tally of 500 now, would be an embarrassment to the Chinese. But I don't think the Chinese have been sufficiently embarrassed at present to want to put any public pressure on the Myanmar. So it's not that the Chinese and Aung San Suu Kyi didn't try to establish a rapport. I think both sides were making an endeavor, both China as well as Aung San Suu Kyi. Quite clearly, the past few years bear witness to that. But the present situation is what it is between the two countries, and the Chinese are acting as a shield.
So my last question on the topic of foreign policy is as such when it comes to Myanmar is that, in your opinion, which questions or debates regarding the coup in Myanmar, specifically regarding this coup in Myanmar, are not being addressed by countries or by media?
I think the media and Western democracies are focused on the fact that the Myanmar army, through staging its actions on the 1st of February, has reversed a process, and that this is unacceptable. I too find it unacceptable. I mean, it's not right, it's not proper. But what needs to be addressed is how do you rectify the situation? And to do that, one has to go into the psychology of the Myanmar army and the complexities of Myanmar society and politics. And that is not being taken into account. And if one goes into these dimensions, then what one may theoretically find or in principle find unacceptable, then one has to find practical ways of addressing a situation so as to resolve.
Okay. So moving to India and Myanmar relations so far, India's biggest point of worry right now can be current political climate in Myanmar and how it could affect the stability of the Northeast and our Northeast states as well. And that is where India is also aligning its own national interest, and it should also to a large extent. However, with India being Myanmar's largest democratic neighbor, do you believe that India's current stand of not wagging a finger at the junta publicly, but trying to reason with it discreetly is appropriate?
I think experience shows that this is more productive because the Myanmar army, as I mentioned, can be terribly insular and xenophobic. And past, the history of the last 3 decades shows that it is willing to turn its back to the world and live in isolation. Now, clearly there are pressures now because, as we discussed, there is a new generation.
Yeah.
But how do you reverse this process and go back to the Myanmar army supporting the system which itself had created along with pro-democracy elements? I think that has to be the focus. And for that, an engagement with the army is necessary. Now, in principle, one can of course say that what is happening is unacceptable. But then I think the way to resolve the situation is only through engagement. Because what else can you do? Will sanctions work? They haven't worked in the past. There's of course no question of attacking Myanmar, of sending in a UN force. No one will agree to that. The path ahead shouldn't be one of bloodshed. Yes, a mixture of carrots, sticks and other things quietly through an engagement process should be deployed, as with the Tamil. But all this has to be approached with cold realism. Howsoever emotionally upset one may feel, realism must be our only guide.
So my last question, sir, for today. India has historically chosen the path of patience and quiet diplomacy, at least according to my opinion as such, especially when it comes to dealing with its own neighbors as well. In light of the strides which China has made in the past decade, especially with the Belt and Road initiatives in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, with the ports, especially the port in Sri Lanka as well, and that it is a mounting geosecurity risk for India as well, with the string of pearls theory, which is very popular. Do you think India should continue on this path of patience and quiet diplomacy, especially when it comes to its neighbors?
Well, in 1988, we weren't following quiet diplomacy. We were denouncing the Myanmar army's action completely. And that led to a hiatus between New Delhi and Myanmar. for a large number of years, and it was only in the mid-1990s, that a more realistic approach was taken. And I think today, learning from our experience of the late 80s, we've decided to pursue the path of realism. China is making rapid strides in our neighborhood. Its relations with Pakistan are sui generis. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, as you mentioned, it's trying to get allies. It is making inroads into various countries, and including in India's neighborhood, and we cannot but be concerned.
Yes.
And we have to deploy the full range of our diplomatic assets in meeting this challenge, the Chinese challenge. And I do think that in order to do that successfully, we don't have to shout from the rooftops. We have to engage purposefully, in many cases quietly and discreetly, but effectively.
Well, sir, thank you again for your time and consideration today. It's always a pleasure talking to you. This is your third appearance on the podcast, and I think the third consecutive week as well, I think. So it's always a pleasure talking to you, sir. It's a privilege as a foreign policy student myself. It's a privilege talking to you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. It's
Thanks, sir.
good to be with you. Thank you. Bye.
If you like listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.